quick pop quiz for you. What is this thing actually called? I'll give you a second to think about your answer. If your answer was Cartridge Box, I'm sorry, but that's not quite right. It's actually a Cartridge Pouch, at least if you're British, or an American portraying a Brit like I am. If you're portraying Continental Army, then you can squeeze by with calling it a box, because historically speaking, the rebels during the American Revolution did not make any apparent distinction between pouches and boxes. But in the 18th century, the British were very keen on insisting that pouches and boxes were in fact different. And today I am going to be discussing some of those differences. For all intents and purposes, this thing that I'm holding in my hand right now is always referred to as a pouch by British military writers. Cuthbertson calls it a pouch, Symes calls it a pouch, the Manual of Arms calls it a pouch. Pretty much any British text you can think of calls this thing a pouch. But the passage that I think most succinctly describes the difference between a pouch and a box actually comes from Richard Lambert, Earl of Cavan's 1776 New System of Military Discipline, which reads, "The accoutrements of a soldier consist of a shoulder belt to which his pouch is fastened or buckled, and of a waist or sword belt carrying his bayonet, the leather of all of which is called buff, being the skin of the buffalo, and therefore strong, thick, heavy, and spongy. The shoulder and waist belt are each much of the same breadth, being about 3.5 inches broad. The leathers of the pouch, such as the buckle straps, flap, and pocket, are commonly made of another sort of dressed leather, but equally thick and heavy as that of the buff. And as to the cartridge box of the pouch, it is made of wood or tin, and so contrived as commonly to contain 36 cartridges, the whole weighing about 5 pounds 8 ounces, and if to that be added 3 pounds 12 ounces more, the weight of the cartridges made up with only single balls, together with the weight of the bayonet, and also of the flints and other convenient articles for keeping the firelock clean and in good order, the whole weight then taken together will be very little short of 11 pounds 8 ounces hanging on the man's body." So did you get all that? Basically, what Lambert is saying is that the pouch is the leather accoutrement that houses not only a soldier's ammunition, but also holds flints and other convenient articles, which probably means things like musket tools and possibly some linen cleaning rags, or things of that nature. And as you can see, if I open the pouch up, it does have a little flap on the inside for storing such items. But a cartridge box is a little different. Again, according to Lambert, box refers to the actual wood block that the ammunition rests in, which goes inside the pouch. And again, if I open it up, you can see that wood block, which has a series of holes drilled into it, and those holes are what you slot the cartridges into. Lambert and other writers like Cuthbertson suggest that the box should have 36 holes, but this was by no means standardized. In fact, prior to 1784, there wasn't a standard for how many cartridges the box should hold, and it was left to the discretion of the colonels of each regiment. Typically, 29-round or 26-round boxes seem to have been most common. Incidentally, mine has 29. There were also smaller accoutrements which were worn around the waist and could hold as few as 9 or as many as 8 rounds. Cuthbertson describes one such accoutrement when discussing the equipment which should be carried by pioneers of a regiment, pioneers being essentially the 18th century equivalent of what we would probably call combat engineers today. These were also worn by light infantry, at least early on in the war, and Cuthbertson refers to this style of accoutrement as a small cartouche box. The wording there is very deliberate because unlike the larger pouches, which are worn over the shoulder, these smaller accoutrements, which are worn around the waist, are actually completely different in their construction. See, with the pouches, you have a leather pouch that contains a wood block that can be removed, and you are left with an empty leather shell, essentially, but one which could, in theory, be used to either carry loose rounds, although I don't know why you would do that, or even other objects entirely. There's a great passage from the narrative of John Robert Shaw, who was a British soldier from the 33rd Regiment who later deserted and joined the Americans. And he describes an instance in which he smuggled liquor into a stockade by taking the wood block out of his pouch and putting a bottle of whiskey in its place. But as for those items that are worn around the waist, those are literally just blocks of wood attached to a belt, with a little leather flap going on over the top and 2 belt loops in the back. So it is literally just a wood box with a few extra modifications slapped onto it. And I'll throw a picture of one up on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. So those are called cartridge boxes, because it's not really fair to call them pouches. Again, the design is totally different. Notice that there's no compartment to house any little bits of equipment, unlike what you see with the larger pouches. Take away the leather flap, and you are left with literally just a wood block with holes in it. So, this is a box, and this is a box, but this is not a box. This is a pouch. Again, as I said at the start of the video, the British were very keen on insisting that there was a difference. So much so, in fact, that when the troops serving under General Burgoyne surrendered at Saratoga in 1777, Congress actually complained that the terms of the surrender had not been complied with. And there were a number of reasons why they thought this, but partly it was because the number of cartridge boxes that had been surrendered by the British troops was alarmingly low compared to the rest of the arms that had been turned in. An inventory of captured articles reported that only 638 cartridge boxes had been turned in compared to the over 4,000 muskets and 3,000 bayonets which had also been captured. And this confused the Americans because, again, they didn't make the same distinction between boxes and pouches that the British did. Burgoyne himself actually had to write a letter clarifying that the reason for the low number of pouches was because not all troops were required to carry them. It was only the light infantry who carried boxes, and even then, a majority of troops had opted to leave their boxes behind whilst the army had been stationed in Canada, as they were considered to be, in Burgoyne's own words, less convenient than pouches. So basically, the British were exploiting a loophole that the Americans didn't know existed by surrendering their boxes but opting to hold onto their pouches. Needless to say, the Americans were less than amused. So again, to recap, if an accoutrement is built to house 26 rounds or more and worn over the shoulder, it's a pouch. If it holds 18 rounds or fewer and is worn around the waist, chances are it's a box. Anyway, I think that about covers what I wanted to talk about this week. Thank you for watching. As always, leave a like and a comment down below if you enjoyed. Let me know. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. And as always, God save the king.